On our wedding day, my wife told me that she valued a meeting of the minds far more than physical pleasure, until she had fallen completely in love with me. We would be husband and wife in name only. I knew the truth, of course. She just couldn't get over her white whale, the one that got away, a rich frat boy from college who knocked her up and then vanished the second he got his acceptance letter to study abroad. I smiled and accepted her terms. For 3 years, I took impeccable care of Chloe Vaughn. But the moment she got a lead on him, she was on a plane. It was 1 a.m. I was crouched in the shadows of the garage, my knuckles white around the handle of a wrench. A text message from Chloe had just lit up my phone. I'm sorry. I just need to give my past some closure. Her past. Her past was getting manipulated into bed by a spoiled asshole, who then ditched her to face the campus gossip and a 5-month pregnancy all alone. And I was the punchline to that joke. The schmuck who showed up with a bouquet of flowers and proposed on one knee right after her miscarriage, when her reputation was in ruins and her body and spirit were broken. Even so, for 3 years, she'd kept herself pure for that man. And now, at the first whisper of his whereabouts, she had dropped everything to run back to him. The anniversary cake I bought last night was still in the trash can, its blueberry filling smeared into an ugly purple-black stain, the same color as the circles under my eyes. I walked back upstairs and knocked on my in-law's bedroom door. Owen, what is it? It's so late, my father-in-law mumbled, cracking the door open. He was groggy, clearly annoyed that I'd woken him from sound sleep. Arthur, Sarah, Chloe's left the country, I said, my voice hoarse, playing the part of the abandoned husband to perfection. What are you talking about, Owen? I held up my phone, showing them Chloe's text message. The noise had woken my mother-in-law, who now stood behind her husband. The two of them squinted at the screen, the phone's glow casting harsh, ugly shadows on their faces. Then I dropped the bomb. She's pregnant. If she goes abroad by herself. I didn't need to finish. They could fill in the blanks. She's what? Arthur's voice cracked, his body trembling like a piece of paper in the wind. Owen, are you telling the truth? I stared down at the tips of my shoes. She was feeling sick last week, so we got a pregnancy test. She was worried there might be complications, and she told me not to say anything to you guys just yet. I pulled up a photo of a pregnancy test, 2 bright pink lines blazing on the display. My mother-in-law, Sarah, let out a choked sob. The sound shattered against the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. That damn girl. I should have broken her leg back then. She pounded her own thigh, her voice a cocktail of regret and fear. That Spencer kid is a snake. How could you go back to him? Spencer Rhodes. I remember the password-protected folder on Chloe's laptop, filled with his pictures. I remembered the way her face looked in the moonlight when she thought no one was watching. 3 years, and she was still obsessed with the man who had thrown her away. Arthur slammed his hand against the wall. A ceramic mug vibrated off a nearby table and shattered on the floor. The airport. We have to go now. We have to stop her before she boards that plane. Her health has been so fragile since the miscarriage. It took 3 years for her to finally get pregnant. If something happens this time, what will we do? I watched them, a silent observer. Ever since Chloe's miscarriage, the doctor had warned that her fertility might be affected. My in-laws' greatest fear was that their daughter would be barren, their family line ending with her. Dad, Mom, I said, my voice urgent. I'll drive ahead and try to catch her. You two get dressed and follow me. I'm afraid I won't be able to stop her by myself. The old couple exchanged a look, seeming to age a decade in that single moment. Under the cloak of night, I drove at a leisurely pace toward the airport, a stark contrast to the panic I'd feigned back at the Vaughn's mansion. Rain began to fall, drumming against the windshield like someone knocking on the gates of hell. Perfect weather. I sat in the car, dialing Chloe's number over and over, each call going straight to her powered-off phone. The minutes ticked by. Just as I pulled into the airport parking garage, my phone rang, the shrill sound slicing through the car silence. Hello, is this Mr. Owen Mitchell? We're from the Riverside Community Hospital. Your father and mother-in-law have been in a car accident. I pressed the cool plastic of the phone to my ear, the chill seeping into my bones. My eyes were fixed on the odometer. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel, but I made my voice tremble like a man in shock. A car accident? Where? How are they? Their exact condition is still unclear. They're in critical care, the paramedic on the other end said urgently. You need to get here as soon as you can. I'm on my way. I hung up, flicked the turn signal in the opposite direction, and peeled out of the garage. The tires spit water, sending up a 2-foot spray. In the rearview mirror, the glowing signs for the airport shrank until they were just fireflies swallowed by the darkness. For the last month, during every sleepless night, I had rehearsed this scene in my head. The sound of Chloe's suitcase wheels on the pavement, the dull thud of the anniversary cake hitting the bottom of the trash can, the look of horror on my in-laws' faces. Every detail was timed with the precision of a Swiss watch. And then, the most important scene of all, the car crash. The red light of the ER flickered at the end of the hallway, a single eye watching over life and death. A nurse handed me a clipboard. In the blank for relationship to patient, I hesitated for a second before writing son-in-law. Suddenly, the doors to the operating room swung open. A surgeon in green scrubs was pulling off his mask as he walked out. I rushed toward him. "Doctor, how are my in-laws?" The male has a cerebral hemorrhage. The female has multiple fractures and internal bleeding. "We're doing everything we can." The doctor's white coat was dotted with dark red specks of blood. "Are you the next of kin? You need to go handle the paperwork. We have to operate immediately." "Doctor, what are the chances?" I asked, grabbing his arm with the frantic energy of any other family member waiting outside in awe. The surgeon had seen this 1,000 times. His tone was flat. "We'll do our best." After signing the consent forms, I stood outside the operating room, praying under my breath. Let the surgery fail. An image of the pregnancy test photo flashed in my mind. "God, please," I whispered. Finally, the light above the door went dark. Arthur and Sarah were wheeled out. The surgeon approached me. "I'm sorry," he said. "We did everything we could. If you have anything to say to them, you should do it now while they're still conscious." I figured the timing was about right. By now, Chloe was probably buckled in her first-class seat on the flight to London, getting ready to enjoy her complimentary champagne. My fingers tapped the screen as I sent a simple text. Mom and Dad were in a car accident. I sent it with all the emotion of texting "the weather's nice today." I wondered which way the scales would tip in that spoiled little mind of hers. Would her grand romance outweigh everything, or would her parents' lies have just enough gravity to pull her back? Would she book the next flight home to see them one last time, or would she push it all aside for the man she was chasing? Who cared? It had nothing to do with me anymore. I slipped on a set of sterile scrubs that made me feel like an astronaut and ambled into the ICU. I looked at the two old figures on the beds, sleeping a deep, unnatural sleep, kept alive only by the rhythmic hiss-whoosh of the ventilators. They were like candles in the wind. A single puff of air could snuff them out. I peeked out the door. The hospital was dead quiet in the middle of the night. The doctors and nurses had probably found a corner somewhere to catch a few winks. Good. No witnesses. I returned to the space between their beds. For a second, I thought about my time in the orphanage. On good days, the head matron would wheel out a small TV and let us watch reruns of Columbo. I always used to wonder if the killers were just idiots. Why commit a crime and then hang around the scene, just waiting for a detective in a rumpled trench coat to expose you? Now, I kind of got it. You weren't waiting to get caught. You were waiting to admire your masterpiece, like an artist lingering at his own gallery opening, unable to tear himself away. "Hey, old man, you still with me?" I yanked the ventilator tube from Arthur's mouth and slapped his face a couple of times. I saw his eyelids flutter, a spastic twitch, before I casually pushed the oxygen mask back over his face. Then I turned and did the same to Sarah, removing her mask. I leaned against the head of Arthur's bed and started talking, as if we were just two old friends catching up. "Seeing as you're about to die, I'll tell you a story. Back in 1975, a group of city kids showed up in Blackwood Creek, West Virginia. Idealists, they called themselves. Most of them had never done a day of hard labor in their lives and couldn't handle the grind of rural poverty. One of them was a kid named Arthur Vaughn. At the sound of his own name, Arthur's eyelids twitched. He seemed to be fighting to open them. I let out a cold chuckle and continued, ignoring him. Arthur wanted out of that forgotten coal town. But then again, so did every other city kid who'd ended up there. You needed connections to get a bus ticket out, and the state troopers checked every car on the main highway. If you actually managed to run off, you'd probably starve to death in the woods before anyone found your body. Only the ones who'd been there for years had given up. By then, they were just like the locals, worried only about whether the corn was growing tall and what the year's harvest would bring. Just when Arthur was about to lose all hope, his luck changed. Thanks to his pretty face, the company store accountant's daughter, Clara May, fell for him hard. For Arthur, this girl was a godsend. When he planted corn seedlings in crooked, staggering lines, she'd show up after her own chores were done to teach him, her fingers flying so fast the seedlings stood up in perfect, straight rows. She mended the tear in his work shirt with a patch so neat it looked like a small flower. The shoe she made for him fit so perfectly he felt like he was walking on clouds, even in the mud. A blind man could see how Clara May felt about him. So, Arthur started getting ideas. This girl was a hell of a lot more practical than the debutantes back in the city. Not only could she help him with the farm work, but she could also sneak some meat into his meals now and then. In that dead-end life, marrying a local logistics manager seemed like the best possible move. After a short courtship, they had a small potluck wedding and got a single marriage photo taken in the county seat. That was it. They were married. Clara may turn their little shack into a home. The dirt floor was swept so clean you could almost see your reflection in it. Before long, they had a baby boy. The three of them, crammed together on a straw mattress, found a sliver of domestic peace in the sound of each other's snores. Then, in 1977, the news came. The government was reinstating college admissions nationwide. Arthur was out in the fields, pulling weeds, when he heard it on the radio. The hoe fell from his hands and clanged against a rock. His ears were ringing as he announced he wanted to take the entrance exams. It wasn't unheard of for men to abandon their families back then. There was even that popular song about hoping the boys who went off to college wouldn't forget the wives they left behind. Clara May's family was worried Arthur would do just that. At first, they refused to let him study for the exams. But he begged and pleaded, and finally, Clara May's heart softened. She got on her knees and begged her own parents to let Arthur go. Arthur devoured his books like a starving wolf, getting skinnier than he ever had from farm work. Clara May, worried sick, boiled eggs for him every day to feed his brain. When the acceptance letter arrived, Arthur jumped higher than the sorghum in the fields, tears and snot streaming down his face. As he boarded the bus, he swore up and down to Clara May, "As soon as I get settled at school, I'll send for you and the boy. We'll live the good life." But after Arthur Vaughn left, he never came back. As I finished, Arthur's eyes flew open, staring at me with a look so full of hate it could have skinned a man alive. The monitors beside his bed started screaming. I calmly turned, replaced his wife's oxygen mask, and stepped back just as a swarm of doctors and nurses rushed in. After a chaotic flurry of activity, a doctor regretfully announced the time of death to the family. I glanced at the death certificate. At the name printed there, Arthur Vaughn, I felt a pang of disappointment. My story wasn't finished yet. The black funeral wreaths drooped like ink-soaked shrouds on either side of the memorial hall. My knees were numb from kneeling on the prayer cushion, the soft padding beneath long since soaked through with sweat. Mourners shuffled in like they were lining up for a county fair, mostly Arthur and Sarah's gray-haired old friends, with a few of his business partners mixed in, their minds clearly on the company balance sheets. They'd pat me on the shoulder, muttering my condolences, while their eyes scanned my face like searchlights. Every other sentence was, "So, where's Chloe?" Like a pre-programmed robot, I repeated the lines, "She's overseas," and I sent her a message, pretending not to notice the dark, calculating thoughts behind their eyes. They were probably thinking I, the son-in-law who'd married in, had hit the jackpot. With the old couple gone, the company would fall right into my lap. Or maybe they were quietly wondering if I'd had a hand in the accident. Suddenly, my phone shrieked like a stepped-on cat. I didn't get up. I just answered it from my kneeling position, hoping everyone in the room could hear the commotion on the other end. The moment the phone touched my ear, Chloe's shrill voice exploded from across the Atlantic, nearly blowing out my eardrum. "Owen, did you put my parents up to this? A fake car crash? Did you really think I'd fall for such a pathetic ploy to get me to come home? I told you I would be back as soon as I got closure with Spencer. Why can't any of you understand that? A car crash. You were just worried I'd cheat on you, weren't you? You could drop the act." She was still rambling, spewing her self-absorbed nonsense. The moment I was sure a few of the guests standing near me had heard the name Spencer, I cut her off, my voice cold as ice. "Mom and Dad are dead. It's your decision whether you want to come back and see them one last time." I hung up and turned off my phone. Christ, if I were any other man, not her half-brother, I'd probably be on the next flight to London with a knife in my hand. 3 days later, after Arthur and Sarah were buried, I was packing my bags. A frantic set of footsteps echoed from the entrance of the memorial hall. Chloe stood there in a brightly colored sundress, completely out of place, her face etched with exhaustion and panic. When she saw the black and white photos in the center of the hall, her legs gave out, and she nearly collapsed. "Mom! Dad!" she shrieked, scrambling toward the altar, tears streaming down her face. I slowly stood up and walked over to her. My voice was still gravelly. "You're back." Chloe's head snapped up, her red-rimmed eyes locking onto mine. You killed them," she screamed. "Why did you have to tell them I was going to see Spencer? If you hadn't opened your mouth, none of this would have happened. You bastard." She grabbed my shirt and started beating my chest with her fists, trying to pour all her rage into me. After a moment, my patience wore thin. I shoved her away. My face was a cold mask as I turned, walked to the study, and returned with a set of divorce papers, which I handed to her. Chloe didn't even look at the divorce papers. She just let them fall to the side. Her voice trembled. "What is this? I got your message. I bought the first ticket I could find. I came straight back. I didn't even get to see Spencer," she cried. "My parents are barely in the ground, and you're divorcing me? You should be comforting me, apologizing to me. Are you even human?" I knew she was scared. Chloe was a spoiled brat, but she wasn't an idiot. Before, she had her parents to protect her. Now they were gone, and the only person she had left to rely on was me. She knew she couldn't run the company on her own. The vultures, her own relatives, would pick her clean. If I, her ever-faithful lapdog, were to leave her too, she couldn't imagine what would become of her. When I remained silent, a flicker of humiliation crossed her face. She took a deep breath, as if making a momentous decision, and placed her hands on the straps of her sundress. The silk fabric rustled as it slid to her ankles, revealing a figure that could tempt a saint. She bit her lip, her voice now soft and watery. I know you've been angry that I haven't let you touch me for 3 years. You can have me now," she whispered. "We can have a baby. Start over. How does that sound?" Honestly, there was no denying Chloe's appeal. A man with less self-control would have pounced. But sorry, my morals are, relatively speaking, still intact. I sighed, walked back to the study, and pulled out another file, one I'd forged myself. I tossed it to her. Chloe didn't take the file. She just stared at me, clearly stunned by my lack of reaction. "You should read this first," I said. Her eyes finally dropped to the folder. When she saw the words DNA analysis report printed on the cover, a knot of dread formed in her stomach. Her hands trembled as she read down to the final line. Conclusion: Arthur Vaughn is identified as the biological father of Owen Mitchell. Chloe crumpled to the floor. Seeing her state, I pressed on. "When I first started pursuing you, it was because I felt this inexplicable connection to you. I always thought it was love. It wasn't until a few days ago, when Dad gave me this report, that I understood. The reason I was so drawn to you was because we're half-siblings." Chloe shook her head violently, muttering to herself. "No, that's impossible. I was a good liar. I kept going. You know I'm an orphan. I never knew who my parents were. When Dad showed up with this report, I was even more shocked than you are now. I couldn't accept it, the idea that my father-in-law was actually my biological father. It was absurd. I pushed him for the truth, and he finally told me everything. Years ago, when he was a young man doing volunteer work out in the country, he married my mother. Later, he got into college, met your mother, and he abandoned my mother and me, leaving us behind." At this, tears began to stream down Chloe's face like broken pearls. She couldn't accept that the father she had idolized her whole life was a scoundrel who had made her. The thought was too grotesque. If this got out, how could she ever show her face in public again? "You can't hide the truth forever, Chloe. Your mother found out. They had a massive fight. The day they were racing to the airport, they weren't just trying to stop you from seeing Spencer. They were trying to get to you, so you could divorce me as soon as possible. Think about it. If the world found out we were brother and sister, our reputations would be destroyed." A long time passed as Chloe struggled to process the devastating news. The revelation that her husband was her brother had nearly broken her. The only small mercy was that in 3 years of marriage, nothing had ever happened between them. If this had come out later, say, after she'd seen Spencer, gotten her closure, and come home ready to start a real life with me. If they had a child, the thought was too horrifying to contemplate. Realizing that this was all her father's doing, the grief she felt for her parents' deaths seemed to lessen, diluted by the sheer ugliness of the truth. She picked up the divorce agreement. When she saw the terms, that the company would be hers, and that I would only be taking my salary from the past few years, a quiet sigh of relief escaped her. It seemed I hadn't used my new identity to make a play for the family fortune. With a trembling hand, Chloe picked up a pen and signed her name. I took the signed papers from her and offered one last piece of friendly advice. "The company is yours now. If you don't know how to run it, I suggest you sell it. The money would be more than enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life." Chloe nodded numbly. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you really going to leave right away?" Even though she couldn't bear to face me, with her parents gone, her instinct screamed for a man to rely on. I nodded. "There's nothing left for me here." Chloe's mouth opened, but no words came out. She had no grounds to ask me to stay. The toxic, awkward relationship between us meant we could never and should never have anything to do with each other again. With that, I finished packing and left. I took my luggage, handed the divorce agreement to my lawyer, and asked him to file the paperwork. The truth was, I could have left the moment Arthur and Sarah died. This divorce was just a formality, a way of closing the door on my past. As for Chloe, I didn't hate her, not really. Neither she nor her mother had known what Arthur had done. Killing her mother was a necessary evil. Sarah Vaughn was not as naive or as easily manipulated as her daughter. If I had let her live, once the initial shock wore off, she might have started suspecting me in her husband's death. And who knows what Chloe would do once she recovered? Would she decide that getting justice for her parents was more important and go to the police? Or would her reputation be more important, forcing her to play dumb? Maybe she'd even help me cover it up. After leaving the Vaughn mansion, I drove straight out of the city. My car finally came to a stop in front of a dilapidated tenement building. I walked up to the third floor, took out my key, and opened the door. "Owen, you're here." The woman inside looked at me with a mixture of surprise and a lingering anxiety that hadn't quite faded from her face. I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. "Leah, I'm here," I whispered. "It's over. We can go abroad together now." "Really? Really? We'll leave right now and never come back. I'll never let you be scared again. I believe you." I had known Leah since we were kids at the orphanage. When I was about 3, my mother, unable to stand the village gossip any longer, had left to find Arthur Vaughn. In those days, it was common for educated young men to abandon the families they'd made in the countryside. A whole cottage industry of human traffickers had even sprung up around universities, preying on women who came looking for their husbands. If a woman was lucky, her husband would take her in. If she was rejected, she was likely to be snatched on her way home and sold to some remote mountain village. My mother never came back. I assumed that's what happened to her. From what I can piece together from my fuzzy childhood memories, my grandparents took care of me for about a year. But my aunts and uncles didn't want me around, so my grandparents took me to the orphanage. I can still clearly remember the last thing my grandfather said to me as he left me there. "If you have to blame someone, blame your father." The wedding photo of my mother and Arthur Vaughn was the only thing he left me. I met Leah at the orphanage. She was about my age, but unlike me, she had been abandoned at birth. It was a time when son preference was still rampant, and it wasn't uncommon for families in poor areas to leave a newborn daughter on the orphanage steps. The orphanage couldn't support all the children, so they would usually report it to the police to find the birth parents and have the local authorities try to reason with them. That was likely Leah's situation, except the police never found her parents. When Leah was almost 10, she was adopted. It was a common practice for families with sons to adopt an older girl from an orphanage. She could help with chores, and when she came of age, they could marry her off for a handsome bride price. Some were even worse, continuing to bleed their adopted daughters dry long after they were married, completely indifferent to the hardships they faced in their new homes. Looking at the greedy glint in the eyes of the couple who adopted Leah, I knew they were exactly those kinds of people. But what could be done? For the orphanage, one less child was one less mouth to feed. As long as the family wasn't destitute, they usually approved the adoption. 2 years went by. Then one day, Leah crawled back to the orphanage, covered in blood. Through her sobs, she told us that her adoptive father was a monster. He tried to molest her while his wife was out. She had fought him off and barely escaped. By then, most of the other kids I'd been close with had been adopted. I was the only friend she had left, so the matron put me in charge of looking after her. Over time, as I cared for her, Leah became dependent on me. That dependence reached its peak when her adoptive parents came looking for her, wanting to take her back. In the end, due to a lack of evidence, and with her adoptive mother providing an alibi, Leah's adoptive father was never punished, just given a verbal warning. After that, Leah was constantly terrified that they would come back and drag her away, so she stuck by my side almost all the time. A few more years passed, and I got into college, the same university that I vaguely remembered Arthur Vaughn had attended. All those years in the orphanage, no matter how much time had passed, the hatred never faded. I had to find that man. I wanted to look him in the eye and ask him if he had a conscience. The steep tuition and living costs were a huge problem. That's when Leah, who had gotten into the same university, suggested she drop out and move south to work in a factory to support my education. I thought about it for a whole night, and then I agreed. Kids who grow up in orphanages mature quickly. I knew how Leah felt about me. She was betting her entire future on me. I wasn't foolish enough to make some grand gesture about working to put her through school instead. The circumstances of my birth meant I would never entrust my future to anyone else. In my junior year, I saw him, Arthur Vaughn, dropping his daughter off at school. Even after 20 years, I knew from the old photograph that it was him. After some digging, I confirmed his name. Just to be sure, to avoid hurting the wrong person, I managed to get a strand of Chloe's hair. I used 2 months' worth of part-time job savings to run a DNA test. The moment the results came back, I pictured Arthur, Sarah, and Chloe on the first day of school. A happy, perfect family. Then I thought about my own years of suffering and my mother's disappearance. Rage completely consumed me. I wanted revenge. I started to purposefully get close to Chloe. I even manipulated a rich kid who was always trying to one-up me, since I always beat him in grades, into taking an interest in her. He didn't disappoint. He used her and then walked away without a backward glance. I quietly spread the story around campus. Then, when Chloe's reputation was in tatters, I stepped in and proposed. She saw me as her lifeline. Desperate to save face, she immediately accepted. Then she took me home to meet her parents. At that moment, I secretly wondered what the look on Arthur Vaughn's face would be when he realized the man his daughter was bringing home as her fiancé was, in fact, his own son. You can't keep a secret forever. I was spending so much time and energy on Chloe that Leah sensed something was wrong. I was calling her less and less. Finally, when she asked me, sobbing, if I'd found someone else, I couldn't bring myself to lie to her. I told her everything. To my relief, Leah understood. She said she would wait for me. I was deeply moved, even though I knew a part of it was because she had already invested so much in me. The sunk cost was so high that she was in too deep to get out. On my wedding day, I was honestly torn. Chloe, whatever her faults, was my half-sister. As much as I hated her by association with Arthur, I couldn't bring myself to commit such an unnatural act. Fortunately, Chloe was the one who suggested we sleep in separate rooms, which saved me the trouble of having to come up with an excuse. After the wedding, I naturally went to work for Arthur's company. He didn't trust me. For the first year, he kept me in a low-level position at the factory, saying I needed to be polished. I didn't want to make Leah wait too long, so I asked Chloe to put in a good word for me. Feeling guilty about her unreasonable demand for separate bedrooms, she agreed. Arthur started bringing me along, teaching me the business. For a while, I fantasized about the day I would completely take over the company, reveal my identity, and watch the look of despair on his face. But plans change. 2 months ago, during one of my secret meetings with Leah, she told me she was pregnant. The news of a child threw my entire plan into chaos. Watching Leah cry, saying she wanted to keep the baby and begging me to just start a normal life with her, I wavered. I smoked a whole pack of cigarettes that night. In the end, I couldn't let go of my hatred. But I also couldn't bear the thought of Leah raising a child alone, suffering the way my mother had. So, I decided to take a huge risk. I planned a car accident for Arthur and Sarah. I told Leah I would divorce Chloe as soon as possible and take her abroad. Leah didn't understand why we had to leave the country, but she was so focused on keeping the baby that she didn't ask. I didn't explain. Some things, even between a husband and wife, are better left unsaid. We both understood that. After picking up Leah, we drove straight to the docks. We boarded a cruise ship bound for Singapore. I clutched the handle of the heavy leather briefcase in my hand. Inside were dozens of gold bars and stacks of US dollars. I'd taken them from Arthur Vaughn's safe. To start a new life abroad, especially with Leah pregnant, the salary I'd saved up would never be enough. I felt no guilt about taking Arthur's money. As long as we were careful, it would be more than enough for us to settle down in Singapore. By the time Chloe discovered the gold and cash were missing, Leah and I would already be in our new home. The ship's horn let out a deafening blast, the roar of a giant beast trapped in a steel cage. Leah was leaning against the porthole, counting seagulls. Her fingertip traced a crooked, smiley face in the condensation on the glass. The gentle curve of her 5-month pregnancy was visible beneath her floral print dress. I walked over, quietly closing the porthole and pulling her into my arms, blocking her view. "The sea breeze is cold," I said. "Don't want you catching a chill."